British headquarters at Nairobi decided further troops would be needed along the coastal front. This was decided on the same date, September 26th, as Nairobi pulled Wavell's Arab Rifles unit back to Gazi. The British defense-in-depth strategy allowed them to shuffle troops around to more easily supply Gazi, immediately sending 2 companies of the 29th Punjabis under Major Hasselhurst to Mombasa, E Company of which stayed to add to the port's defenses in the event that Koningsberg attempted to land troops in Mombasa. G Company marched off to Gazi. The 2 King's African Rifle Companies, C Company, and No. 1 Reserve Company of the 1st King's African Rifles in Mombasa made for Gazi, and began to entrench their position. Major J.M.P. Hawthorne of the 1st King's African Rifles took command of the area. The village of Gazi was flanked by tall brush and coconut plantations. Nairobi was happy with the lack of contact with the enemy, but Nairobi didn't immediately send additional troops as the Indian forces along the swampy coast had begun to suffer from malaria and fungal infection. Additional buildup would drain forces unneedingly. The effects of the swampy coast were also draining on Hauptmann Baumstark's German occupation. He had spent time following the previous engagements to build up supplies at camps at Kikomeni and captured Majoni. Needing a resupply of medicine and ammunition, he had to wait before advancing further from his new bases. British Zanzibari Liwali bin Ali's spy network was able to report the buildup on the 5th of October to Nairobi. Suspecting the axis of advance to be northward aimed at Mombasa, further British troops were deployed to Gazi. The Jhind infantry and a set of heavy machine guns were loaded on naval transports and taken by sea to Gazi, arriving on the same day, whereas E Company of the 29th Punjabis had to march to Gazi overland during a storm, arriving at noon on the 6th of October, just a little rest before the dawn. Daybreak, Hauptmann Baumstark launched his attack, quickly using superior firepower, the picket posts on the Kikomeni track towards Gazi. Fighting in the rows of coconut tree plantations and the thick brush that dotted the landscape outside the village, by noon the British forces were pushed back to the trenches surrounding the village. Hauptmann Baumstark had again divided his forces to feature small flanking units to draw off British attention or to get in the rear. The southern flanking column under Hauptmann Bomken with 15th Feldkompanie Schutztrupp and the Arab Corps was repulsed by British picket units, still not engaged on the Imkuramuji River, while a section of Germans flanking west was able to cross the Imwachimi River with ease and actually occupied a portion of the Gazi-Mombasa road. If the battle went poorly now, the British line of supply and retreat was now cut off. And what's more, it's likely they didn't know. The German main advance was only halted by a bayonet counterattack by the King's African Rifle units. With the Germans stopping to assert firepower superiority, the attack was halted, and the British Askaris had to again retire under such rate of fire. Around 3 p.m., Major Hawthorne tried another bayonet attack. This time, no falling back. Either the Germans or British Askaris would break and scatter from the bayonet charge. As the whistles blew and the Askaris cried out, the British ran at the Germans. One by one, each British officer was wounded and required being carried back to the dressing station. The King's African Rifles were now leaderless and in the open. Over the cries of the wounded and the gunfire, Color Sergeant Sumani of the C Company 1st King's African Rifles yelled determination into his fellow Askaris to carry on. The resulting bayonet charge stormed through the German lines and scattered Hauptmann Baumstark's Askaris. What German forces attempted to hold out were pushed back by the Jhind infantry, rushing up to reinforce the King's African Rifles. By 4 p.m., no German units remained fighting outside the village. The German section on the Gazi-Mombasa road was forced to retire back into the bush, having contributed nothing. Hauptmann Baumstark's retreat across the Ikamunji River wasn't complete until after midnight, and his forces retreating across the river were harassed by the 29th Punjabis. The surprise at being overtaken made many German Askaris ditch their gear and rifles to wade back across the river. Having waited all night for what men he could, Hauptmann Baumstark retired back to Kikomani. Back at Gazi, the British recorded 2 dead Askaris and 12 wounded. Recovered dead German forces as 8 dead and 23 wounded. The southern flanking column, while it had been checked, no confirmed casualties were discovered after the action. This encouraged the local district commissioner to ask for a military attempt to recapture his region. But the plan was vetoed by Nairobi, as other sections of the front were still fluctuating. For the next period of time, only small patrols would engage one another.